is in fact gender-responsive budgeting? There are several definitions. For Council of Europe since 2006, gender-responsive budgeting is a reflection of the political will and steps undertaken in achieving gender equality through application of tools that are allowing for including gender perspectives in budgeting. Gender-responsive budgeting means gender assessments of the budget and inclusions of gender perspective in all phases of the budget processes. Why gender budgeting? The budget is the most important policy instrument and most powerful tool for societal transformation, as it can respond by providing resources to the needs of different groups. The budget sums the government policies and their priorities. The budget, as well as the policies, is not gender neutral. The budget impacts women and men differently. The budget reflects the distribution of power in society, the social and economic disparities, and the different societal roles women and men have in society. Therefore, we can also simply describe gender budgeting as good budgeting. As Professor Dan Elson, one of the most prominent gender and development social scientists, stated, "It is a way for us to follow the money through the lives of women and men." The GRB approach does not provide a single methodology or tool that fits for every context. A range of mainly analytical tools for doing gender-responsive budgeting have been proposed for carrying out gender-responsive budget analysis. In general, tools need to be adapted to the respective national or local context. Each initiative needs to choose which tools to apply based on which actors are involved, the nature of the political and budget management systems, and a range of other factors. In addition to analytical tools, the gender perspective should be integrated in institutionalized routines such as forms, guidelines, rules for administrative processes, checklists, etc. In that way, GRB will not be a one-off initiative. GRB should take place on an annual basis, with lessons learned being used to inform the process in subsequent years. Over time, GRB will become more and more a part of the mainstream budgeting process. Some countries like Macedonia and Albania have used budget circulars as an approach for engendering the budget process. The budget call circular is an official notice issued by the Ministry of Finance at the beginning of the budget preparation process. It contains instructions to other government ministries and agencies on how they must submit their budget requests for the coming budget period. One way to engender the budget circular is to state explicitly in the call circular that gender should be reflected in the submissions of the municipalities to the Ministry of Finance. Another way that circulars can be improved from a gender perspective is to require that all relevant indicators are gender desegregated and that gender-related indicators are included wherever relevant. This is how budget process is managed in Albania on central level. Gender-aware budget statements aim to demonstrate the expected implications of the budgets in addressing issues of gender inequality. It is a statement or a report from government on how gender issues are addressed by budgetary policies, expenditure, and revenue. Macedonia on central level government uses gender budget statements in budgeting. They refer to the following question: where is most of the money going? This question is important because the GRB approach is aimed at mainstreaming gender, for example, at ensuring that gender is considered in relation to the main policies and government spending. Which programs are most important for gender equality? This question is useful because sometimes there is an activity that costs relatively little, but which can make a big difference to gender equality. To do GRB, you need appropriate preconditions and choice to make. First of all, to do GRB, an important precondition is to have a political will to introduce gender perspective in policy and budget process. Since both are interrelated, we need politically inducing environment to reorganize the way how policy is developed, and budgets are planned in order to reflect the different needs of women and men in policy measure and budgets allocations. Secondly, to pursue a gender-responsive budgeting initiative, you need institutional framework. Most of the NALAS countries have gender machinery on central and local level made of gender focal points. However, as you probably know, one person cannot make a big difference. So the experience we want to share is from countries where the focal point has created a formal or informal intersectoral working group of colleagues and/or municipal councillors with whom the process of introduction of gender perspective in policymaking and budgeting is pursued. Working in a team is always more fun and more effective. Who can and should be a part of the working group? Coordinator and deputy coordinator for equal opportunities. Representative of the sector or department that is a subject of GRB analysis. Local economic department in the previous example. Representative of the budget or finance department. Representative of the sector for strategic planning. Representatives of the Equal Opportunities Committee. Instead of temporary working groups when conducting GRB initiatives, you can follow the example of the city of Skopje, Macedonia, and institutionalize the whole process by establishing intersectoral group for implementation of gender-responsive policies and setting forth gender-sensitive goals in all sectors and departments. This group has the responsibility to review all programs and policies, as well as budget allocations, to provide comments and inputs in order to improve their gender responsiveness. Thirdly, in order to create gender-responsive budget, you need sex-desegregated data to determine needs, set objectives, define indicators, provide gender assessment of budget programs, etc. Without data, gender-responsive budgeting is a lost cause. A lot of data is already available through official statistics. Other databases can be created by collecting data on implementation and beneficiaries of programs and services you already deliver. So, start collecting data. And do not forget, it must be sex desegregated. Fourthly, the data needs to be analyzed for what you need skills for gender analysis. Gender analysis uncovers how gender relations affect the development problem. This aim may just be to show that gender relations will probably affect the solution, or to show how they will affect the solution and what could be done. Through gender analysis, you will be able to define measures to be included in local government programs. Finally, once you have all preconditions checked, please choose one of the following approaches how to introduce gender perspective in budgeting. Approach 1. To establish one or more gender equality objectives and the design of appropriate activities and identification of budget allocations to achieve the objectives. The focus is on the status of gender equality in the sector and identification of areas for improvement. For example, what are the gender imbalances in education? Are boys doing better in science? In relation to sports, the participation rates of males and females could be the focus. This sectoral analysis will lead to an understanding of how gender inequality is manifested and in turn to the identification of measures and resources to improve the situation. Or approach number 2, to systematically examine all budgetary items with the objective of making any necessary changes to produce more gender equitable outcomes. The focus here is given on the existing activities or programs and their associated budget lines. For each budgetary activity, the purpose of the analysis is to discover the differential impact on men and on women, to determine if there is an adverse impact on one gender or another, and to redesign the activity so as to redress the imbalance and so promote gender equality. How do we start with GRB in practice? There are a number of different ways to go about conducting a GRB, and we'll go over one of them. Keep in mind that GRB initiatives can take different forms and must be tailored to meet local, political, and economic realities. This methodology is called gender policy analysis or gender policy appraisal, and it has been first applied in South Africa, and Diane Elson calls it a 5-step approach to gender policy analysis. Step 1 is situation analysis of women, men, girls and boys. Prior to the analysis, you should identify one or more sectors on which you wish to conduct a gender analysis. You can choose any sectors like education and health, employment, culture, sport, or whichever sector is priority for your municipality. For example, municipality of Strumica and Bogovinje in Macedonia have chosen the local economic development program as a priority. Conduct an analysis of the situation for women and men and girls and boys and the different subgroups within a given sector. You should collect key statistics. For example, ask, what is the situation of women and men related to employment and unemployment? How many of them are economically inactive? What are the needs and challenges that women and men are facing on their road to economic independence? What is the education status of the unemployed? What are the needs and perceptions, including gender stereotypes, of the business sector in recruitment of new employees? Now, let's practice. We all work in more or less wide areas, but you can choose one issue or problem or area for this exercise. If you do it, by the end you will be able to design and appraise a gender-responsive policy and budget. Now that you have chosen an area, please define what the situation of women and men is in that area. What data you need to collect to determine the situation. Where will you get the data from? Please do not forget that we all come with subgroups. There are women and men with disabilities, women and men of different ethnicity. There are victims of violence, rural women and men that need to be observed as specific subgroups, and their situation is different from that of the other women and men that do not belong to these subgroups. What is the gender dimension in the given area? Why the situation of women and men is different? Can we account them to traditions, beliefs, norms or values? Are gender stereotypes predominant? Are gender roles reflected on the situation you have determined? If you want to fill out this table, please use the handout Situation Analysis, Table 1. Since you have determined the situation of women and men, boys and girls, and their subgroups, you are able to determine the differences between them. Analyze the differences, please. These needs can be practical and strategic. Practical needs are defined as basic needs of survival and include food, shelter, clothing, and water. Practical needs refer to the material conditions of life. They are short-term, can be met through direct material inputs that can improve living condition, but not affecting their social status. Just bear in mind that women can enjoy a rather high standard of living, but still are in disadvantaged social position and face up oppression in Saudi Arabia. That being said, taking care of just practical needs of women and men does not mean we are improving their social status or enhancing gender equality in our communities. What concerns strategic needs, these are identified by women because their subordinate position to men in society. Strategic needs are related to power, control, decision. Strategic needs are therefore not easily identifiable. They refer to the socio-economic and political position of women as compared to men. Strategic needs are defined by gender inequality results, and these include domestic violence, labor segregation, wage gap, etc. The strategic needs refer to the skill set and level of awareness, capacity women and men gain to achieve equality, the legal conditions that need to be met in order to support equality, and the societal values that must be altered in order equality to prevail. If you want to fill out this table, please use the handout Situation Analysis Table 2. Now, based on the situation of women and men, boys and girls you detected, think of their practical needs. Are there any? Do not forget these are survival needs that refer to material conditions of life. Also, based on the analysis of situation of women and men, boys and girls you detected, identified their strategic needs. Do not forget these are long-term needs and refer to the power, control, and decision relationship between women and men, and the skills, knowledge, awareness, and legal and social environment needed to override the subordination of women to men. Once you have done that, define the ways how you can address the identified practical and strategic needs. Addressing practical needs tends to involve women as beneficiaries and participants. So, including women in detecting priorities for next year budgeting, planning interventions such as water, sewage, road construction, etc. are possible avenues for addressing practical needs. These, however, do not alter traditional roles or relationships between women and men. Addressing strategic needs involves women as agents or enables women to become agents of change. Empowering women as leaders, decision makers, improving their position in society can empower women and transform gender relationship of their subordination to men. Step 2. Assess the gender responsiveness of current policies, programs, and budgets. Collect information about relevant policies, programs, and legislation in the sector of analysis. If we use the same example from above, the local economic development program as well as government policies for employment, tackling unemployment, active employment measures, etc. The information needn't be exhaustive. Ask whether the policies, programs, measures, activities are gender responsive. Do they respond to the situation in which women and men, boys and girls are established within previous step? Are the measures for support of SMEs responding to those needs and challenges equally? How to create program and budget for support of local entrepreneurs that are gender sensitive? Based on the interview of the program and the information collected about the situation of the target group and gender issues identified, you can now carry out an analysis of the program from a gender perspective using different analytical instruments. If the program is large, you might not be able to analyze all sub-programs and activities at once. The selection of which sub-programs and activities to analyze is very important. You want to make sure that the main sub-programs and the activities where a large part of the budget is allocated are included in the analysis. Taking the previous example again, you can check: who is the targeted beneficiary of the local economic development programs? Are there measures responding to identified needs and challenges that women and men face in this area? What is the gender structure of the beneficiaries of those measures? Are trainings for employability skills and self-employment offered to women at times and locations that are conducive to their participation? Are there any funds allocated for implementations of measures specifically targeting women? Were these funds spent as planned? What was delivered and to whom? This involves checking both the financial and the physical deliverables disaggregated by sex. Let us go back to your exercise. In your chosen policy area, think of the policy documents, strategies, operational action plans and programs that are relevant for the issue you were analyzing, the situation of women and men. Write down in the left column all these documents. Now read through them. Once you are done, please write down in the middle column how each of the documents relevant to gender equality, if that is the case. If the document is not relevant, also note it in the table. How each of the documents is relevant to gender equality, if that is the case. If the document is not relevant, also note it in the table. Finally, think of the relevance of the policy documents to the needs of women and men you identified previously. Do the policy documents include activities and measures that address the practical and strategic needs of women and men? Write down your assessment in the far right column. Based on the work in the previous steps, it will be possible to develop recommendations that address different aspects. One important set of recommendations will be directed to improve gender equality within the target program. This can address changes with regard to goals and objectives in order to address specifically main gender inequalities and specify what gender equality objectives should be included in the relevant programs. Also, results, activities, performance indicators or budget allocations are important focus for recommendations. What are gender-sensitive results and indicators? Gender-sensitive measures are critical for building the case for taking gender inequality seriously, for enabling better planning and actions by gender and non-gender specialists, and for holding institutions accountable to their commitments on gender. A gender-sensitive results refers to results achieved for women and girls compared with those achieved for men, and results that contribute to changing relations between women and men and norms around gender roles. Gender relations. Examples of gender-sensitive results in the area of economic development are increased capacity of women to understand and use financial, banking and business services effectively, initiatives supported that facilitate women to access decent work, formal and informal employment, including women with disability. A gender-sensitive indicator measures gender-related changes in society over time. The term gender-sensitive indicators incorporates sex-disaggregated indicators which provide separate measures for men and women on a specific indicator such as number of workers employed in sectors per year disaggregated by sex after workforce development activities, number of women entrepreneurs participants on trainings for SMEs development, number of women entrepreneurs participants on SMEs Expo event, number of women associations created or assisted, percentage of registered enterprises that are owned or managed by women, micro, small and medium-sized. Once we are done with defining results, indicators and activities, we must define the budget allocations for implementation of the proposed activities. This is, in fact, the main part of the GRB process to see the gender equality objectives within the budget. Without the budget allocations, we are only conducting gender analysis, not real gender-responsive budgeting. Now, write down what measures you think should be included in these documents to address what inequality and what need. Since you have a list of measures and you know the policies that regulate your area, identify what will you change, where will you ask for amendment of policy, plans and programs to integrate the measures you've just developed. Define these interventions at policy, plan and program level. Step 3 is about doing gender assessment of the budget in the program or sector where you introduce gender perspective. This involves assessing whether the budget is planned and whether it is sufficient for resolving the problem or gender gap that you have defined in step 1. Also, budget analysis should be focusing on the new measures or the adaptation of the existing that respond to needs of women and close gender gaps. For this purpose, costing should be performed. Costing aims to obtain an estimate of how much public expenditure is needed for the provision of particular services or the implementation of a particular policy. It can involve the estimation of other costs besides monetary costs. For example, the cost in terms of unpaid work time for beneficiaries of certain programs. Cost means the amount of expenditure, actual or notional, incurred on or attributable to a given thing, and costing means the process of ascertainment of costs. So, we will need to determine costs for the measures you have identified to be introduced to the policy documents. Why? Because these measures can be implemented and therefore make the change and transformation of gender relations only if there is appropriate budget allocation for their implementation. Costs have 3 elements: expenses, labor, and materials. All of these elements have indirect and direct costs. Back to the previous example. If the municipality would like to create a subsidy pre-qualification scheme for the unemployed women, one could calculate how much this will cost and what will be the benefits of the municipality in respect to taxes collected after the women find jobs, as well as gender relations improved in respect to shared unpaid care work with their husbands. Let's determine the costs for materials. These are costs needed for substance of which the products or services are made. These are also made of direct and indirect costs. A. Direct material is one which can be directly or easily identified in the product. For example, timber in furniture, cloth in dress, computers in administration, etc. B. Indirect material, one which cannot be easily identified in the product. Example: glue in furniture, color or bleach in dress, software in computers in administration. Please fill in the Table 1 with handout costing. Let's determine costs for labor. By labor costs, we mean all human effort required to turn the materials into products and/or services. These are also made of indirect and direct costs. A. Direct labor is one of which can be conveniently identified or wholly attributed to a particular job, product, or process. For example, wages paid to carpenter, fees paid to tailor, salary paid to civil servants, etc. B. Indirect labor is one which cannot be conveniently identified or attributed wholly to a particular job, product, or process. For example, accounting, legal advice, network manager, social media and communication officer, etc. Please fill in the Table 2 in handout costing. Let's determine costs for expenses. This includes other expenses than materials and labor. Also, expenses can be direct or indirect. Direct expenses are those expenses which can be directly allocated to a particular job, process, or product. Example: exercise duty, royalty, special hire charges, etc. Indirect expenses are those expenses which cannot be directly allocated to a particular job, process, or product. For example, rent, insurance, maintenance, advertising, etc. With the needs detected as a result of the situation analysis of women and men, the measures developed to address those needs, with identified entry points in policy, what needs to be changed in order for the measure to be adopted, and estimated costs of the measure, you now have a design of a gender-responsive policy and budget appraisal. This design includes policy and budget intervention that can enhance gender equality and decrease gender inequality. Therefore, in the table provided, please define clearly what measures need to be adopted, what policies need to be changed, how much should be budgeted. Although we assume that once they are in the program and budget documents, the proposed activities will be implemented, the practice shows that very often this is not the case. This is only one of the reasons why we need to monitor the implementation of the engendered programs, monitor whether the money was spent as planned, what was delivered, and to whom. This is the step 4 of Gender Policy Analysis Framework. It involves checking both the financial and the physical deliverables disaggregated by sex. In the case of local economic development, you would want to have a look at actual expenditures of the activities. Were funds spent as anticipated? How much was allocated for programs that specifically benefited girls, women? You would also want to monitor the delivery of services. Were the trainings for employment and self-employment organized in a time and location suitable for both women and men? What was the number of female participants? What was the number of female educators? While it likely isn't possible to verify every last detail, a spot check or a few randomly selected services delivery points should give you a sense of whether there is a problem or not. This is an example of a simple monitoring matrix prepared to follow the implementation of activities in the municipality of Strumica, Macedonia. The final step is to conduct an assessment of the impact of the policy or program and the extent to which the situation described in step 1 has changed. In short, have the policies and programs resulted in increased or decreased gender equality, or has there been no measurable change? Be sure to identify any lessons learned from the process to feed into the next year's budget. We'll briefly go over 4 of other tools for GRB introduced by Diane Elson and on the basis of the Gender Responsive Budgeting textbook for universities, Unwoman by Ahmetovic, Đurić-Kuzmanović, Klatzer, Listeska. Gender-aware beneficiary assessment is focusing on the beneficiaries, who they are they satisfied, do they have access and control over the resources invested by the local government? Who are the winners and who are the losers? Are we creating a new gender inequality with the design of the policy and or services delivered? How to make gender beneficiary assessment? Ask actual or potential intended beneficiaries of public services to assess how public spending is meeting their perceived needs and what their priorities are for public expenditure. Use opinion polls, attitude surveys, focus groups, interviews, and role plays to solicit this information. Don't forget to include both men and women. It can be enlightening to ask men what they think the priorities of women are and the degree to which they are benefiting from services, and compare these responses with those given by women. Include a wide cross-section of the population, not just people in the urban areas. Include older and younger people, educated and illiterate, and individuals from different ethnic groups, etc. Gender Desegregated Public Expenditure Incidence Analysis (EIA), also called Benefit Incidence Analysis of Public Spending, is aimed at analyzing the extent to which women and men, girls and boys benefit for public expenditure. This analytical technique analyzes how public expenditure for a given program is allocated to beneficiaries from a gender perspective. It is intended to reveal the distribution of expenditure between women and men, girls and boys. This quantitative tool can be used to assess the distribution of direct payments, financial benefits and transfers, or public services provided. How to make gender expenditure incidence analysis? A. Estimate the unit cost of providing a particular service. For example, all costs associated with maintaining and staffing a community health center for 1 year. B. Estimate the use of services at the center by men and women and boys and girls. C. Use these figures to calculate the amount spent per year on each group. Gender Desegregated Analysis of the Impact of the Budget on Time Use looks at the relationship between the national budget and the way time is used in households or by individuals. This is aimed at revealing the macroeconomic implications of unpaid work in social reproduction. For example, the time devoted to caring for family and community members, cooking, cleaning, teaching children, etc. How to make gender desegregated analysis of the impact of the budget on time use? Whenever expenditure cuts are proposed, ask: is this likely to increase the amount of time that men and women spend on unpaid care work? For example, If the government is proposing to cut the program that provides free after-school care for school-age children, the likely outcome is that women will have to spend more time caring for their children. This is unpaid work. What can the municipality do to revert the burden of unpaid work that is created with cuts? Gender-aware revenue analysis examines both direct and indirect taxes or other forms of revenue, like user charges, in order to calculate how much of taxation or other forms of revenue is paid by different individuals or households. This tool examines the proportion of income paid in taxes and user fees by women and men. How to do a gender-aware revenue analysis. Support and expand existing efforts to improve the collection of sex-disaggregated data. Tax policy units in the municipalities can be supported to collect and analyze sex-disaggregated as well as other necessary data and produce tax analysis reports. Tax administrators might also consider collecting information on the tax filers according to their sex. Support a legal review of the taxation law to identify explicit bias and formulate recommendations for change. Support research on the equity improvements that could be attained if a greater share of tax revenue is shifted from indirect taxation to more progressive direct taxes. These studies should focus on distributional consequences as well as on administrative and implementation aspects of personal and corporate income tax. Case studies and exercises for all GRB tools are presented in Module 4.